Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here at Book Blather. If you're new here, I'm Dave. This is Olive, and we mostly talk about books to help spread the joy of reading. We just finished a couple of books, but I think we're going to do these. Not I think, we're definitely going to do these separately. Unlike usually we do like wrap up or we do a couple together, but we're going to do these individually for a couple of reasons. So, the one we wanted to talk to you about today is Shards of Earth by Adrian Tchaikovsky. So, this is one we've been working on for a while actually, and we finally just finished it. So, as you may know, we are very big Adrian Tchaikovsky fans. So, we've read a bunch of his stuff. He has an incredibly large bibliography, so I mean, there's a lot of stuff we haven't read, but for us, we've read a fair bit of his stuff. We've read the entire Children of Time series thus far. Children of Time, which we loved, one of our favorite books ever. Children of Ruin, which we loved. And Children of Memory, which we didn't love quite as much, but which we also really enjoyed. And we read Doors of Eden, which is a standalone, which we really, really enjoyed. And we read Alien Clay, which is a standalone, which we really, really enjoyed. We also read a novella, Ironclads, which we actually haven't talked about. So we'll talk about that another time. Didn't love that one quite so much, but I might read that again because it was short. So generally, we really love Adrian Tchaikovsky. As you can tell from those books, his books tend not to be too short, but they are always worth it. And so the latest one that we read, which was a little bit different experience for us, was Shards of Earth. And so this book was published in 2021, and this is the first in a trilogy called The Final Architecture. And this one was a different experience, and we're a little conflicted about it. I mean, not so much, but a little bit. And we'll explain why. But first, let's tell you what it's about, and then we'll get into that, and about how the story is presented. So, buckle up, because this one, it's a little complex, which is part of what we'll talk about later. So, this basically is set, of course, in a far, far future. You would call this a space opera, I guess, but it's a pretty complex one. So it's a complicated world. So the world we're living in is we have, humanity has expanded and colonized many worlds. And one day, when this story starts, we are reflecting back on an event that happened like 120 years ago, and it is when these humongous alien entities show up and destroy worlds, and these are called the architects, and they just show up, they don't communicate, and they're incredibly powerful, and they basically just tear worlds apart. And what they do is they actually they just rend the worlds, they just twist them and reshape them, deform them into these like crazy structures. And you can kind of see a rendition of a planet being just totally reshaped there on the cover. And so and they don't communicate, so they don't say why. So they're incredibly powerful. There's really no defense to them. So eventually humanity learns that, when they show up, you just evacuate the planet as quickly as you can, as many people as you can. And so when this event that we're looking back on, when this happened, a bunch of worlds were destroyed, including Earth. So in the present day of our story, where humanity is their main planet, humanity is based on a planet called Berlinhof. But they've colonized a number of different worlds. And what happened in this event that we're looking back on is there had been a particular, and nobody could communicate with these things, and there had been a particular individual. She was a girl, like a teenage girl at the time, and her name was, what do they call him, Saint Xavier or Saint Zavant, something like that. I'm gonna forget some of these names. There's actually a glossary in the back which is if you read this, I would recommend, which I did not do, but I would recommend reading the glossary and the timeline before you start. That was a mistake that I made, and her name was what was her name? Saint Xavier, yeah. And so there was something special about her where she was able to communicate, not she was basically able to have a very basic communication with the architect that was attacking that world, and it was enough to make them stop. And the architect just went away. So then, what humanity did was they started this program to develop um, genetically engineer humans that look promising in this way to basically alter them psychologically, alter the minds a little bit so that they could numerous things. So they could communicate and they could navigate and so I'll get to that in a second. But so they do that and they create. It's called this. So they're the people they're creating called intermediaries, and or ints for short. And one of them is who ends up being a main character in our story is this character called Idris, and he is one of the ones. A lot of these ints, they either die or they go crazy. The program is not incredibly successful, except that they are able to make a limited number of people that can replicate what this Saint Xavier did, and one of them is Idris, and he is one of in like a final showdown. He is one. I think it's three of them, and he is one of them that is actually able to break through and communicate with the architects. Just basically to say, hey, we're here. Stop killing us. Why are you killing us? We're here. Just to make the architects like recognize that there are intelligent entities here, and so they make that breakthrough, and then the architects, once they realize it, the architects just disappear and go away, and nobody's seen them for years, 120 years, right? Which brings us to our current day. So one of the main characters is Idris, who he's like, it's obviously much later in life. He's older now. He's been scarred in a lot of different ways, and he is part of this sort of like ragtag crew on this. I guess it's like a salvage ship called the Vulture God, and so he's on there with a number of different humans. There's a few of them. There's a captain. There's a main character called Chris, who has basically always been with him. She's like she's a lawyer, like a galactic lawyer, but she has her own rough past, so she has other skills. And there's a couple and there's a couple other humans. There's Ollie, who's a drone specialist who is crippled that can only basically move around with the help of machinery, but is very very capable. And there's a couple of other species on the. Now we're in this galaxy today where we've encountered a number of different other species. A couple of which are in this ragtag crew. There's Kit, which is a Hani, which is they're sort of like very like commercially oriented, like crab-like species. And then there's the Hivers, which they had been originally created by humans, and they are sort of these sort of like cybernetic insect based things. That's like a whole bunch of them together create an entity, and they were created by humans, but they've now basically gained independence. And so they're on this ragtag ship that kind of like starts the story. But there's other significant groups and species in this galaxy. One of which is the Parthenon, and the Partheni are basically an offshoot of humanity. They were genetically engineered, so they're all women, all very attractive. They all look very similar, and they are warriors. They are incredibly skilled at battle, and they basically joined with. They were part of the resistance of humanity and played a critical part in. There's a lot of sacrifices by everybody, including the Partheni, to try to stop the architects when they were attacking. But since then, in the 120 years since, they have become estranged, and they really are completely separate. And so there's a lot of sort of political and tension between major humanity and the Parthenon. And then there's a very important, powerful species called the Essiel, and they have I won't get too much into the story, but basically there are artifacts that had been left by some long vanished species called the originators, and the Essiel, who have now built this empire, they are able to use. They have a special knack for using these artifacts in a way that can actually act as a shield to the architects, which is obviously incredibly valuable to the rest of the galaxy, right? So, and so basically, they're not bad, but basically they will offer you protection if you join them. So if you pledge allegiance to them, they will give you their protection, and so they are they have this hegemony because of that. Um, I didn't say that right. Hegemony, right? Hegemony. So they have this hegemony because of that, and they and so even some human worlds, like there's a lot of worlds, and there are some that are independent. Even some human worlds have kind of broken off from humanity and pledged allegiance to the SEL. And so you have all these different groups, right? And we are living in this world where people travel through to all these different worlds um, through what's called unspace, which is sort of like this. There are these throughways for quick travel between different worlds. They're basically wormholes, and you can travel. That's how everybody has to travel quickly, unless you basically have a special navigator, aka an int. And Idris is one of those. So Idris is very important as a pilot because he can navigate unspace, which is, like I said, this kind of fabric below regular space. It's kind of like in Star Trek when you go into like warp speed and you're kind of like in this in this sort of other sort of space. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like traveling through this the area like a wormhole that breaks the laws of space and time. And so Idris can pilot through unspace, and he can go into unspace also to do some communication. So I won't get too much into that because obviously I don't want to give away the story. But so this is basically the world that you're living in. This is kind of the setup. There are a lot of different characters, a lot of different groups, right? You have like humanity nativist, you have some sort of like religious groups that want to play everybody to pledge allegiance to the Essiel, empire, and there's crime organizations, and there's all these different groups. And so we're now in present day, and all of a sudden there is a ship, this abandoned ship that is sort of looks like it had been twisted up by an architect. So it seems that maybe the architects are back. And so that's all these years later. And so that's a basic aspect of our story. And so, as you can tell, it is pretty complex, right? There's a lot of people and a lot of groups and a lot of worlds and a lot of things happening, which is why it's got a glossary and a timeline in the back. And so what happens is this story is told from the perspective of four different characters. And you constantly are alternating back and forth through this. And it is told from Idris's perspective. It is told from Chris's perspective, who's one of his shipmates, the lawyer, the badass lawyer that's been with him forever. Solace, who is a Partheni. She's from the Parthenon, but she has an old history with Idris because they basically fought together and recovered together in the original war when they fought off the architects. So she becomes, I don't want to give too much away, but she becomes very involved with the crew of the Vulture God. And then there's another character that we see the perspective, not as much, but sometimes this character called Haveir. And Haveir is from Mordant House, which is like the intelligence service of Hugh, or, basically the governance of humanity, of non-humanity that hasn't like pledged their allegiance to the Essiel. And so you see some from Haveir's point of view, which is, I guess, kind of makes some sense. But And so you're constantly flipping back and forth from the distant, different point of views, but most of them you're getting. It's mostly you don't see a lot from Haveir, and most of it is from what's happening with the Vulture God, or at least with that group, even if they're not always with the Vulture God, the ship. And so that's the setup, and it was so the reason I said it was conflicted was because there were a number of things that made the book a very different experience than some of the other stuff that I've read from Tchaikovsky, and that made it a little bit difficult. The first and obvious thing is that it was really complex. There was a lot of people and a lot of groups, you know, government groups, diplomatic groups, political groups, crime and government, and you have all these different groups of people, all different types of people, politicians, scientists, just spacers, like crew, just people that are used to flying in space, military people. There was a lot. And I have to say it was too much at times. It did get hard to follow. Sometimes just the conversations had so many people in them because you had all the you'd have these political, you'd have these like tension points, and you'd have all these different politicians and people talking about things, and it was too much. It was too much. So there was just so much happening in this one book, and I guess a lot of it is set up, but it did get difficult to follow at times. Because of that, I read a lot of other things while I was reading this book, and sometimes I would set it down and come back to it, and that's on me. That obviously made it a little worse. When you do that, that makes it worse, obviously. So that it made it a little bit harder to follow along. So that was my own fault. But that happened because sometimes I often just need a break, because it was a lot, and I'm like, ah. So there were times in the book where actually I wasn't enjoying it so much, but I was very invested, right? And so it's not a short book like none of Tchaikovsky's stuff, and it was interesting, and so I wanted to keep going, and of course, I eventually did push through and finished it. And you know, of course, it grew on me, and I got very attached to certain characters. There are characters that die. It's one of the good things about the book is that it's one of those books. It's not like you have a whole group of people or like they're all safe. Like they can't. I mean, people die, and you never know who might. And but there's characters. One character in particular, which I won't give away because it might give away too much about the story, that I was very attached to and grew very, very attached, invested in that character, and definitely want to see what goes on with what else goes on with that character. So the reality is, I am probably going to continue on. Almost surely will continue on with this series, but that's another issue, I guess, that I had with the book is that this is a genuine series, right? This is a real trilogy. So a lot of Tchaikovsky's stuff that I read so far is very self-contained, which is one of the things that I really love about Tchaikovsky. So this Children of Time series, right? This is a series, okay? It's a series that there's a lot of big ideas in here, but it's told very well. It's not you never get too much at once, even though there's a lot of big ideas in it. It gets, it's piece by piece, or at a reasonable pace, flipping back and forth between two storylines. But importantly also is at the end of each of these books, when you got to the end of Children of Time, there was complete closure. There was complete closure to the story. And I think that's one of the brilliant things about these series is that each of these books had complete closure. You were totally satisfied. You totally could have stopped there. But then he took the next book. He was able to tell a new story in the next book, which sort of continued the previous one and with some of the same characters, but things were expanded now, and you got to go see new worlds with related things happening, but different and new. So it that's part of what made this series so amazing. That each one was self-contained. You didn't immediately need to read the next book to hear the rest of the story, and I really like that about that because I there are so many series out there, which is a pet peeve of mine. There's so many series out there, trilogies or even longer, where you need to read the whole thing to get to the end of it. This is one example. This is like the opposite end of the spectrum. Is that, and I don't know what I did with the first book, but this was a duology. I know that's not the correct term, but there's a duology. It was a 2-book series. The first one is called Pandora's Star, and this one is Judas Unchained. Look at that. I mean, you can see the writing in it, right? This is a 1,000-page book. I don't know where Pandora's Star is. I spent like a half an hour looking for it. I was so frustrated because I wanted to show them both together to show how thick it is. But I don't, for the life of me, I don't know where it is, which I don't understand because it's not like I'm whipping these out and rereading them like, all the time. So I don't know why they weren't together. But I mean, maybe I lent Pandora's Star to somebody, but that would surprise me because I probably was not recommending that book to anybody. So the series was okay. These are by Peter Hamilton. It was a good series. There's some good ideas. It wasn't phenomenal, but it was pretty decent. But each book was 1,000 pages, and there was literally no closure whatsoever at the end of that first 1,000-page book. It literally ended with somebody the scene was like somebody going off a waterfall. It was literally cut in the middle of a scene, right? So, nothing. I mean, it was a 2,000. This duology was a 2,000-page book, a single 2,000-page book. Very frustrating, right? You got to read 2,000 pages to get to the end of the story, and so some of these trilogies are not quite that long, but you get 400 or 500 pages a book. You're going 1,200, 1,500 pages to get to the end of the story, and so many are like that, and it makes me reluctant to go into these series because you have to know going in that you're going to commit to read all three, one after the other. And I don't know. It's not my thing. A lot of people like it, but that bugs me. It's one of the things I like about Tchaikovsky. Those books had closure at the end of each one, or some of his stuff. These were great books. Doors of Eden and Alien Clay, and they were just standalones. They had good standalone stories. They're also long, but this is not. You don't get any closure. There's a little bit of closure. You learn a tiny little thing about the architects at the end of this book. And there's a little bit, you could maybe say that, some people would probably say that particular storyline kind of wrap, but it didn't. It didn't wrap. It's still full-fledged moving forward. You don't know very much. You have to go on to the second book. So, and I'm assuming that means you have to go on to the third book. So I'm assuming it means you have to read the whole trilogy. So those were the things that made me a little conflicted. Is I just going through it, I just didn't enjoy it as much as I did some of the other books because it was too complex and too much going on. And I'm a little frustrated that there's no closure at the end of this, and I just didn't expect that from Tchaikovsky at this point, but maybe some of his other stuff that I haven't read is like that too. But a little frustrated that I have to go on and read, 2 more that are also this size, because I'm a slow reader, so it takes me some time. But the reality is, at the end of the day, I like the book. You liked it too, right, Olive? Did you like this book? You liked it, and I'm almost certain I'm going to go on. I have the next one already, but I'm going to take a break. I'm not going to read it right now. I am going to take a break from it, and hopefully don't forget too much in the meantime. But there is a timeline and glossary in the back, so maybe just a quick little review of that to give me enough of a refresher to go on to the second book. So I'm going to go on with the series eventually, but yeah, so it just, I thought those things were worth mentioning because it did make it a very different experience, this one for me. So, okay, I think I dragged on long enough about that. But have you read Shards of Earth, the Final Architecture? Have you read the whole Final Architecture series? Because if you have, I would be very interested to know your thoughts and if it is worth reading the whole series, because like this one was well over 500 pages, right? 550 pages. So I think the other ones are about the same length. So it's an investment. If you read the whole series, I would like to know what you thought about it. If you would please share that with me, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to bite the bullet and keep going. But yeah, let us know if you read this and what you thought, or if you're a Tchaikovsky fan generally. Let us know. Let us know if you read any of these other ones that we read, or if you've read any of his other stuff. He's got a very long fantasy series, which we're going to tackle probably before too long, and Shadow of the App series. But that's a lot of it's like 10 books or something like. I mean, it's a lot. It's a long series, but yeah, we it's hard to go wrong in our experience with Tchaikovsky. So we'll leave it at that. So thanks so much for watching this very long video about Adrian Tchaikovsky. But as always, thanks so much for watching. We will see you guys again very soon. But in the meantime, take care. You want another pick-me-up? Yeah? Do you have anything else to add on this matter? On this book? Did you have anything else you wanted to say about this book? No? You think I covered it all? Okay. All right, so we'll see you again very soon. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you next time.